What's up everybody? I hope y'all are having a wonderful day. I'm Anthony. On today's video, I wanted to go over the key to surviving and thriving that no one seems to be really talking about. Now, I'm not going to dilly-dally here. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The key to surviving and thriving is being able to successfully, that's the key word, successfully grow, store, and use grain crops. Now, how do I know this? Because I've read a freaking history book. Now, long story short, for tens of thousands of years, humans were known as hunter-gatherers, meaning we followed the herd and we were foraging for as much food as we possibly could. You can only get so big by doing that, all right? There's only so many people to go around. There's a lot of time input required to be able to do this stuff. So around 10,000 years ago, when we became an agrarian society, that's when we saw human beings almost level up into the next stage of existence. By being able to grow our own food, especially grains, we were able to store an excess, okay? So we didn't have to constantly work all the time. We were able to do other things like build, not just focus solely on food. And this is why grains are so important to civilization. You didn't see the Egyptian pyramids that were being built by workers that were fed things like Brussels sprouts. You didn't see Roman aqueducts being built by workers that were being fed cabbage. You saw them being built by workers that were being fed bread and beer, things made strictly from grains. Now, am I saying you can't be successful if you are a hunter-gatherer? Not at all. But what I am saying is it's going to require a lot more input and a lot more time versus the person who may be next to you that is growing their own grains. They'll be able to get ahead of you pretty quickly. Okay, so that brings me to the meat and potatoes of this video. I wanted to talk about 3 different types of grains you can grow at home. Number 1 is going to be a true cereal. Number 2 is going to be pseudo cereals. And number 3 is going to be grain legumes. Now, your true cereals are things that you've heard before, things that are very common out there, but they are seeds from edible grasses, all right? So things like wheat, rye, oats, rice, sorghum, corn, barley, those are all true cereals. Now, the reason why true cereals are so important is because even today, in 2022, about 80% of the protein intake of humans and livestock and about 50% of the calories come from true cereal grains. Now, there is a big drawback of true cereals, and that is timing. There are 2 types of true cereal grains, and there's going to be your cool season and your warm season, all right? Warm season is going to be things like millet, corn, and sorghum, and cool season are things like wheat, oats, rye. You have to know what you're growing at what time. You can't be in the southeast like me and trying to plant wheat in March. It's not going to work because it's going to get way too hot here and it's going to burn it up by July. So you need to make sure you're planting it properly so you can be successful. Now, things like corn have to be grown in the springtime because it needs the heat. You don't want to plant corn in the fall and all of a sudden wonder why you're not getting anything. So that's why timing is so important, because unfortunately the true cereals require a long growing window to get that seed. Okay, so next up is going to be your pseudo cereal. The reason why they're called pseudo cereals is because they're not quite a true cereal, but they are nutritionally almost identical and they are used in very much the same way. Some examples of these are going to be amaranth, buckwheat, and quinoa. Now, one of the main reasons why you absolutely want to grow pseudo cereals is because they are a complete protein. Now, let me explain. This is very, very important. When you're out in nature, there is 9 essential amino acids that your body cannot produce itself, okay? You have to find them by eating them. When you eat things like meats or dairy, there's all 9 essential amino acids in there, so you don't have to go anywhere else. But when you eat things from the plant world, like wheat, they all have all of them except one. Most of your true cereals are missing lysine. So you're going to be deficient in lysine if all you're eating is wheat. But if you eat things like pseudo cereals, they have all 9 in them. So things like buckwheat and quinoa are complete protein. So if you had nothing else to eat and only ate those, you would survive just fine. And another plus of pseudo cereals is the fact that they grow in a much shorter time span, okay? So when it comes down to things like wheat, where you're waiting 8 months for something, you can plant buckwheat and literally go from seed to seed in 12 weeks. And finally, that brings me to grain legumes. Basically, these are your beans. So when I talk about grain legumes, I'm talking about your common beans, traditional beans like pintos or black beans. I'm talking about peas, maybe chickpeas. We're talking about lentils and peanuts. There are 2 main reasons why you're going to want to plant these along with other cereals. Number 1, they are nitrogen fixers. So if you plant something like corn, which is a heavy feeder of nitrogen, the next thing you're going to want to plant is going to be a legume because that's going to fix nitrogen back into the soil. By doing so, I'm not going to get into the whole process of chemistry. All they do is they take nitrogen out of the air, put it down in the roots where they have a symbiotic relationship with the bacteria, and it allows the bacteria to convert the nitrogen from the air to something in the ground the plants can use. So that's a very good thing if you plant things like corn that are very heavy nitrogen feeder. And number two, you're going to want to plant these because you can eat them in their immature form. Things like wheat, barley, rye, they cannot be eaten in their immature form. You want to let those dry on the plant, okay? That's how you're gonna be able to get that storage aspect out of them. Same thing when it comes to beans, except you can actually eat these in their immature form and still get almost the exact same nutritional profile as you would a dry bean. So when it comes down to your pinto beans, well, you don't have to wait for them to get dry in the pod. You can actually eat green beans and still get a lot of nutrition. Same thing when it comes down to Lima beans. You don't have to wait for the lima beans to completely dry out. You can eat them in their green stage and be just fine, which is a very good benefit if you have time not on your side, because within 60 days you're able to eat versus having to wait 6 months. Now that I've gone over the 3 types, I'm going to tell y'all which ones I have experience growing myself. You're going to be kind of surprised, but I only have real experience growing 4. All right, I've grown corn, all 3 types. I've grown sweet corn, flint corn, and popcorn. In my opinion, down south, you can grow all 3 just fine. Make sure you plant kind of early enough so the corn earworms don't get in there, but it's really not that bad. I enjoy growing popcorn because it stores much easier. Same with flint corn. But then I've also grown pinto beans. One of my absolute favorite types is going to be the rattlesnake pole bean. That thing is so vigorous and it's easy to see because the pods have purple streaks. So if you grow things like that, you can eat them green, but then you can also just let them dry on the plant, shell them, and you have a very good quality pinto bean. Now number 3 is going to be lima beans. For some reason I always had a problem growing lima beans because I planted them too early. They like it a little bit warmer, so when I put them down in March, they didn't really get going until end of May when things started getting hot. So if you plant them in May, you're going to be a lot better for it because they will be, boom, off to the races. My favorite part about lima beans is they are a bush plant, so you don't have to put a trellis, and they give actually a lot per plant. So I highly suggest if you're looking at planting a bean that doesn't require a trellis, you look into lima beans. And the 4th one is going to be cowpeas. If you live in the southeast, you need to be growing some form of cowpea, black-eyed pea, because they grow in the heat, in the humidity, and they handle droughts like you couldn't even tell, okay? If there's a 3-week period where it doesn't rain at all, even one spritz with a hose is going to be fine. They're not going to die. They're going to keep on giving. They do not mind droughts. They are amazing, and I highly suggest if you are in the southeast, you check into those. But for me personally, I wanted to expand my repertoire. I don't want to just have those 4 options. I want to be able to grow something else. So I've been basically telling myself this year is going to be the year where I'm going to try 3 different grains, all right? The first one I'm doing is wheat. As you can see here, I put down wheat in about end of October, about the same time I planted my garlic. Because I wanted to try something new, and I know for a fact when I've tried wheat before, I planted it in March and it burned up. So I had to make sure I paid attention to the fact that it is cool season, and I talked to other people who have grown wheat in my area. They all told me you need to plant it in the fall. That way when it does get hot, it's all you're doing is drying the seed on the plant. So I figured if I planted it in October, I'd be ready to harvest by June. Now the other 2 I'm going to try out is going to be millet and buckwheat, for the sole purpose that millet can be used as a chicken feed, and buckwheat, I really enjoy buckwheat pancakes, and the growing season is very short. So I'm going to try both of those this year. I have German foxtail millet seeds in the house, and I have Takane Ruby buckwheat I'm going to try out. Hopefully I'll be successful enough to where I can save enough seed next year to plant a much bigger plot. So that brings me into the storage aspect. The reason why grains are so great is because they can be stored for a long period of time without going bad. Now, yeah, you may get things like brown rice or peanuts or just any kind of bean in general because they're oily. They may not last that 20 years, but if you get things like wheat, it can really go about 20 years without really losing too much of its nutritional value. So by being able to grow a humongous bumper crop and store it away, you're insulating yourself from a lot of different problems that may happen that following year. That's why grains are so important. So make sure you can store them in a cool, dry place in an area that rodents will not go after. Because let's be honest here, Norway rats and mice in general can chew through a 5-gallon bucket. So if that's your only plan, you have to rethink that and maybe consider doing a steel can or a metal can. That way you're not losing what you work so hard for. And finally, that brings me to the use aspect. The last thing you want to do is to be that person that's really good at growing things but doesn't know how to cook. All right, you have to know how to use this stuff just like you have to know how to grow this stuff. So you made it to the point where you're able to grow it, you can store it, now it comes down to using it. For me, if you are going to be growing any kind of cereal grain for sure, you need to make sure you have some form of grinder or mill. Me, I have a Country Living grain mill. I bought it last year. This thing is freaking amazing, and I want you to see it. So here it is. This is my Country Living grain mill. This thing is freaking awesome. It took me a long time to be able to save up enough money to buy this, but I do not regret it at all. If you are going to grow your own grains, you need something like this for sure. So the way it works is, you're going to want to mount this to a table. I had this thing C-clamped to the table when I use it, but I'm actually building its own, like, kind of rolling around almost like an island. That way I don't have to worry about keep unclamping it and reclamping it, because that gets kind of annoying. So that's what I'm doing with this thing as of right now. But the way it works is you put your wheat, rye, whatever in here, and then you spin the handle and it crushes it down, mills it down between the stones, and it comes out of here. All right. That way, if you're growing things like wheat, you can get the full advantage of making flour to make your bread. Now, this isn't just relegated to true cereals. You can still use this thing to make cornmeal or grits, and you could also use this thing to grind down beans. So if you want to, make refried beans or something, then you can absolutely do that as well. You can also pull this thing apart to the point where it's just catching to where it'll be able to dehull things like buckwheat. So that's why this is an extremely important tool if you're going to make sure you grow your own grains. You want to make sure that you can actually use them, not just kind of have them in their whole form. You need something like this. One piece of advice for you though, if you are going to buy this, don't do what I did and just buy it off Amazon. Make sure you shop around, because the parent company, the actual website, Country Living, I think grain mills or whatever, I'll put it down below in the description, they run a lot of sales. And I remember when I bought this thing, I could actually get it $20 cheaper if I would have bought from the parent company. So make sure you're shopping around. I'll go ahead and put below both links, that way you can see which one's actually cheaper at the time you're watching this video. The thing is freaking amazing, right? But if you are going to be growing other things, there's some stuff that does not require milling. If you're going to eat things like millet, if you're going to eat things like quinoa, they don't need to be ground down. You can eat them whole, just make sure you soak them. Same thing when it comes down to beans. Unfortunately, things like black beans are toxic until you actually cook them properly. So make sure whatever you're growing, you know how to cook it, because you don't want to end up dead by eating too many black beans without cooking them. Alright, so I think I'm going to end the video there. I've probably thrown so much information at you, your head's just going to go poof. So I don't want that to happen. I want to make sure that you walk away from this video inspired. So I'm going to end it here. But this is one of those things I just want to put in your mind, maybe get your wheels spinning, because I want you to really consider growing at least one of these this year if you have a garden, okay? I know a lot of people like to grow tomatoes, they like to grow lettuces, they like to grow cucumbers, but let's be honest here. You're not going to change the world by growing those things. You're going to change the world by being able to store long-term high-calorie foods. That's why grains are so important. Now, if you pay attention, I didn't mention anything about potatoes in here, okay? Potatoes are a starch. They're not necessarily a grain. That's why I didn't add them, but potatoes are also a very good option if you can't grow any of these grains. The only problem with potatoes is they are susceptible to blight. You don't want to end up like the Irish in the 1800s, where you have a complete blight issue, so you get the potato famine and you have to immigrate to the United States. We don't want that, so make sure you are thinking of multiple options here, not just putting all your eggs into one basket. That's the whole point of the video. I hope you learned something. If you did, please do me a humongous favor and give me a thumbs up. It absolutely helps out my channel, and it gets more eyes on this video, so maybe you can help your neighbor who's not going to come knocking on your door if something bad happens, all right? Subscribe, share the video, and I will catch y'all on the next one, all right?